If you cannot pay the stall tax, pack up this pile of garbage yarn, and get the hell out of my sight." The vicious words cut right through the howling winter wind. The arrogant landlord kicked over Mary's handmade basket, with a cruel smirk. Dozens of meticulously crafted yarn balls scattered into the dirty, freezing snow. The local vendors nearby watched in stunned silence, too afraid of losing their own spots to intervene. Mary did not fight back, or raise her voice in anger. She simply threw her arms around her frail, blind father, to shield him from the bitter gusts. A warmth woven from simple kindness can light a fire that survives the darkest storms. If you believe in karma, hit that subscribe button right now to support the truth. And if you believe in the power of a good heart, leave a comment below saying, "I vow to keep my heart kind, to warm a cold world." While the landlord laughed at their misery, a man in a worn-out delivery jacket stepped forward. He was holding a little girl's hand tightly. He did not say a single word. He just knelt in the icy slush and began picking up the ruined yarn one by one. His name was Richard, and the look in his deeply lined eyes was absolute ice. Mary was a true fighter, who never backed down from life's cruelty. She spent every waking hour spinning eco-friendly yarn from recycled materials she salvaged herself. Her fingers were always raw, calloused, and covered in small painful blisters. Every single dollar she made went straight into an old glass jar hidden safely beneath her bed. She was desperately trying to save enough money for her father's expensive cornea surgery. He had worked double shifts at the local textile mill his entire life, just to put food on their table. He had lost his sight many years ago, in a tragic industrial accident that the company covered up. He was the only family she had left in this massive, unforgiving city. Now it was her turn to protect him, absolutely no matter the personal cost. "Mary, what is happening out there?" her father asked, his blind eyes frantically searching the empty air. His frail hands were shaking uncontrollably from the biting cold and the sudden noise. "Nothing, Dad. Everything is completely fine," she lied, her voice cracking under the heavy weight of her unshed tears. But this landlord did not care about her daily struggle or her desperate hopes for a miracle. He was a new money tycoon, who had recently bought the master lease to the entire outdoor market. He despised the poor, hard-working vendors, who scraped by for pennies. He wanted them all gone immediately, so he could flip the prime property for a massive corporate payout. He wore a tailored cashmere overcoat that easily cost more than Mary's entire yearly earnings. "Look at this pathetic display of poverty," the landlord sneered, pointing a fat, diamond-ringed finger at Mary. Then, he suddenly turned his malicious attention to Richard and the quiet little girl. "And what are you looking at, you delivery trash? Get out of my way, before I have you thrown out into the frozen gutter too." Richard stood up, slowly, purposefully, and deliberately. He calmly brushed the dirty snow off his faded, oversized canvas jacket. He did not raise his voice to argue with the screaming man. He did not flinch or step back in fear. He just watched the landlord with a calm, terrifying silence that felt much heavier than the storm itself. The landlord puffed out his chest, trying desperately to mask his sudden, inexplicable unease. "You think you are tough because you stare at me like some stray dog? This whole historic block is about to be acquired by a massive global corporation. When they finally take over, worthless scum like you will not even be allowed to walk on these pristine sidewalks." Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his mind racing with calculations. The freezing temperature was rapidly getting entirely unbearable for everyone outside. The wind whipped fiercely around the small group, aggressively biting into their exposed skin. Richard's little girl, Lily, started to shiver uncontrollably despite her heavy winter coat. She let out a terrified, heartbreaking sob that echoed against the brick walls. The angry yelling and the bitter, unforgiving cold were simply too much for her fragile nerves. Mary heard the little girl crying through the chaotic noise of the street. Even though her own life was currently falling apart in front of her eyes, she could not ignore a child in pain. She quickly reached into her remaining, undamaged inventory basket. She pulled out her absolute most prized creation of the entire season. It was a thick, beautifully crocheted scarf, made from the absolute softest recycled organic fibers. It was her ultimate masterpiece, taking several agonizing weeks of late nights to perfect. It was the one luxury item she desperately hoped would pay for a full week's worth of groceries and heating fuel. Without a single second of hesitation, Mary walked directly over to the shivering little girl. She gently wrapped the incredibly warm, heavy scarf around Lily's freezing neck, tucking it in securely. "It is okay, sweetheart," Mary whispered, with a genuine, gentle, reassuring smile. "The storm will always pass. It always does. I promise you that." Lily immediately stopped crying and buried her cold, tear-stained face into the soft, deeply comforting fabric. Richard looked directly at Mary, completely taken aback by this selfless gesture. His stern, guarded expression shifted instantly into something profoundly different. He reached out slowly and deliberately touched the frayed edge of the scarf. The very moment his fingers felt the complex, intricate texture of the material, something massive clicked in his highly analytical brain. Richard was not just a poor, struggling delivery driver trying to survive the winter. He was the notoriously elusive CEO of the largest sustainable fashion empire in the entire country. He was a self-made billionaire who had built his towering legacy on groundbreaking, ethical textiles. He had purposefully taken his daughter out in disguise to see the real, harsh world, far away from their insulated corporate bubble. And with just one brief, professional touch, his expert hands recognized the absolute genius of Mary's work. The complex stitching technique was mathematically flawless and highly durable. The raw material was exactly the kind of groundbreaking eco-friendly innovation his top, highly paid designers had been failing to create for over 5 years. Even at the absolute bottom of the abyss, facing eviction and starvation, this remarkable woman chose to warm someone else. Never underestimate the power of a desperate father, and the absolute authority of true kindness. Show your support for Mary right now, before things get worse. Drop the comment, "I vow to keep my heart kind, to warm a cold world." The landlord saw the tender exchange between them, and scoffed loudly in absolute disgust. "Oh, how incredibly touching and pathetic. The street trash is sharing its garbage with the other street trash. Guards, get out here right now and do your jobs." Two massive, heavily armed security guards stepped aggressively out from the nearby office building's glass doors. "Throw this blind old fool and his completely useless daughter onto the street right now. Toss all their pathetic junk straight into the dumpster where it belongs." The guards cracked their knuckles loudly and moved intimidatingly toward Mary's terrified, defenseless father. Mary screamed in panic and threw herself physically in front of him, spreading her arms wide to take the physical hit. Richard gently pushed Lily behind his own back to keep her safe from the impending violence. He took one deliberate, calculated step back from the immediate commotion. He reached deep into the inner pocket of his ragged, unremarkable coat. He did not pull out a weapon or a wallet full of cash. He pulled out an old, heavily encrypted military-grade satellite phone. He pressed a single, pre-programmed red button. He held it to his ear, and spoke two incredibly calm, deeply chilling words. "It is time." The two massive security guards lunged forward, their heavy boots crunching menacingly against the ice. Mary squeezed her eyes shut, and braced her fragile body for the inevitable, brutal impact. She wrapped her arms even tighter around her trembling father, praying for a miracle. But the heavy physical blow she was expecting never actually came. Instead, a blindingly bright array of LED headlights suddenly tore completely through the thick winter storm. A massive convoy of 6 jet-black, armored SUVs roared around the corner, their massive tires screeching violently against the frozen asphalt. They completely surrounded the small, dilapidated yarn stall, blocking every single possible exit in the narrow street. The roaring engines purred with heavy, intimidating power, cutting through the howling wind. The aggressive security guards froze instantly, dropping their raised batons in absolute, sheer confusion. The wealthy landlord took a hesitant step back, his arrogant smirk melting into a look of deep uncertainty. He desperately assumed that these were the corporate executives, arriving to finalize his massive, life-changing real estate deal. He quickly patted down his expensive cashmere coat, and slapped on a fake, overly eager smile. The heavy, bulletproof door of the lead vehicle swung open smoothly. A senior executive assistant stepped out into the freezing snow, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that defied the bitter cold. He was holding a large, custom-made golden umbrella. He completely ignored the groveling landlord, who was practically bowing in the slush. Instead, the executive walked straight over to the man in the ragged delivery jacket. He stopped respectfully, bowed deeply at a perfect angle, and held the umbrella carefully over Richard and his little girl. "Chairman Richard." The executive spoke clearly, his voice carrying undeniable authority. "The complete acquisition of this entire commercial district has been successfully finalized, exactly as you ordered. The property deeds have already been fully transferred into your private holding company." The entire street went completely, terrifyingly silent. Even the howling winter wind seemed to pause for just a single fraction of a second. The landlord's fat, diamond-ringed hand began to shake so violently that his expensive gold watch rattled loudly. His face drained of all color, turning an absolutely sickly shade of pale gray. His weak knees completely buckled underneath him, sending him crashing down into the dirty, freezing puddle he had just kicked Mary's yarn into. He stared up in pure, unadulterated horror at the man he had just called worthless street trash. Never underestimate the quiet wrath of a father, or the absolute, crushing power of true justice. If you want to see this cruel man get exactly what he deserves, drop the comment. I vow to keep my heart kind, to warm a cold world. Richard finally looked down at the pathetic, trembling man groveling in the slush at his feet. The delivery jacket suddenly did not look poor or worn out anymore. It looked like the quiet, calculated disguise of an absolute apex predator, who had just finished observing his prey. "You were extremely proud to announce that this historic block was being acquired by a massive global corporation." Richard's voice was completely calm, yet it carried the heavy weight of an absolute executioner. "You were entirely correct about that single detail. My corporation." The landlord desperately opened his mouth, trying to force out an apology, a plea, absolutely anything to save his miserable skin. "Please, Mr. Chairman, I had absolutely no idea who you were," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "I was just trying to clean up the streets, to make the property presentable for your arrival." Richard did not even blink at the desperate, miserable excuse. "You did not fail, because you did not recognize me," Richard stated coldly, his piercing gaze cutting right through the man's fragile ego. "You failed because you completely failed to recognize basic human decency. Effective immediately. Your master lease is permanently terminated for gross ethical violations. You are entirely banned from operating any commercial business within any property owned by my global empire. Now, get out of my sight, before I have my legal team take every single penny you have ever made." The landlord opened his mouth again, but the massive security guards, suddenly realizing who actually signed their paychecks, grabbed him roughly by the arms and dragged him away into the storm. He lost his entire fortune, his pride, and his future, in less than 5 agonizing minutes. Richard turned his attention away from the pathetic display, and looked directly at Mary. She was still sitting in the snow, clutching her blind father, completely overwhelmed by the sudden, massive shift in reality. Richard knelt down in the snow once again, right in front of her. But this time, he was not picking up ruined yarn. He gently took her calloused, freezing, blistered hands into his own warm ones. He looked at the intricate, incredibly soft recycled scarf that was still wrapped securely around his daughter's neck. "Mary, your incredible talent and your remarkably pure heart are worth more than any piece of real estate in this entire city." He gestured toward the historic block surrounding them. "I am officially renaming this entire commercial district. It will be completely rebuilt as a massive, fully funded charity and sustainable commerce center, and it will bear your name." Mary gasped, tears of pure, unadulterated relief, finally spilling over her cold cheeks. Furthermore, Richard continued, his voice softening with genuine, profound respect. My fashion empire has been desperately searching for a director of heritage design. I want your brilliant mind, your sustainable techniques, and your beautiful soul leading my global creative team. Your father will immediately be transferred to the best private medical facility in the state for his cornea surgery, fully covered by my personal accounts. It was exactly what she had been fighting for her entire life. It was the ultimate, beautiful reward for never giving up her humanity in the face of absolute darkness. Several months later, the bitter winter had finally melted away into a beautiful, vibrant spring. Mary's father had successfully recovered from his complex surgery. For the first time in countless years, he could finally look into his brave daughter's eyes and see the incredible woman she had become. Mary had not only healed little Lily's anxious heart with her endless, maternal warmth, but she had also quietly thawed Richard's guarded, isolated world. They had grown incredibly close, building a bond based on profound mutual respect and genuine love. One quiet evening, as a gentle, late-season snow started to fall softly around them, Richard took Mary to the exact spot where they had first met. The old, dirty street was now a gorgeous, brightly lit community center filled with warmth and laughter. Richard slowly got down on one knee, right there on the pristine, white cobblestones. He pulled out a stunning, ethically sourced diamond ring that sparkled brilliantly under the warm amber streetlights. He asked her to weave her life together with his forever. When we choose to give away our last bit of warmth in the darkest, coldest winter, fate always finds a way to bless us with an entire sky full of radiant stars. If this beautiful story of karma and love touched your soul, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. And leave one final comment saying, I vow to keep my heart kind, to warm a cold world. Thank you so much for watching, and always remember to stay kind.